Morning, everyone. My name's Lana. I'm a librarian at the University of Adelaide, and thank you for joining me today on Ghanaland for this webinar. I'd like to acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional owners of the land from where I am presenting from today and pay my respects to elders past and present. And I invite you to feel free to pop into the chat if you'd like to acknowledge where you're tuning in from. Also, so welcome. Hello again if you're joining us for another week. Otherwise, welcome if you're new to this series. This webinar is part 6 of a weekly series that the library is hosting this semester, and we invite you to come along to any others in the future. So today we'll be looking at grey literature, what it is, when you might use it, and how you can find it. Okay, so let's dive into our content for today. So first up, you might be wondering, what even is grey literature? But first I wanted to have a look at what traditional literature might refer to. So traditional literature, you've got on one end of the spectrum, you've got your scholarly traditional literature like books and journal articles. They are published by publishing companies. So their main task is publishing. That's what they do. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got things like newspapers, magazines, news articles, that sort of thing. And while they're not scholarly in that sense, they do still fall under that traditional literature because they are published by publishing companies as well. So in saying that, grey literature in its most simplest definition is information that is produced by a group whose main task is not publishing. So that's where the difference lies between traditional and grey literature. So now you're probably thinking, okay, so what groups outside of publishing companies are producing this kind of information? So first up, you've got all levels of government, so federal, state, local government. You've got businesses and industries, groups like non-governmental organisations or NGOs, so maybe something like Beyond Blue or Cancer Council, and then academia as well, so universities and schools. And for all of these groups, and there are probably other kinds of groups there as well, but these are just sort of the major ones, publishing is not their main task, but they are either in the position to or they have the authority to go out and collect and produce information. And that information then is grey literature. This kind of information can take many, many forms. So you've got things like reports, census data, theses, conference papers, patents, and even going down to things like blogs or emails or newsletters, that sort of thing. Now, you might be pretty comfortable with looking at traditional literature. You know where to find it, you know what a book is, you know what a journal article is, and you might be wondering, okay, so why am I even interested in grey literature? But one time, you might be trying really hard to find something in your traditional sources, but you're just not getting what you need. One of these things could be because journal articles and books, even more so, can take a really, really long time to publish. So if there's something that has only recently happened or is currently happening, you're going to have a really hard time finding anything that's published in that traditional sense. So that's when you might need to branch out to grey literature. So other than, maybe not quite finding what you need at all in the traditional sources of information and needing to branch out, grey literature is really great for supplementing your traditional academic sources that you've already found. As I just mentioned, grey literature can offer you much more current information, sort of the latest research in an emerging field, perhaps, because it takes a lot less time to produce and publish than books or journal articles. You're also more likely to find grey literature that offers you a local perspective or a specific region or area that you're interested in. It's generally readily available, easy to access. It can be a little bit harder to find, but that access is there. It's easy. You don't have to go through a subscription or a library to get it. You might be able to use grey literature to provide more perspectives. Generally, diverse perspectives or marginalised populations aren't very well represented in traditional literature, so that's why you might want to branch out to grey lit. Data counts as grey lit, and sometimes raw data can be really useful depending on what you're researching. And when you do come across journal articles with studies and research done in, they generally don't give you that raw data. They've just given you an interpretation of it. Because of all of these reasons, and probably a few others that we haven't mentioned, but these are probably the major reasons why you might want to use it, is Grey literature is very, very good at filling research gaps, or just giving you that sort of unique information that you might not be able to find in that traditional sense, in especially in emerging fields of study, or current happenings and whatnot. Now, while all this sounds great, there are some things to be aware of and be critical of. And, this is the same in any information source that you're looking at. Grey literature, for one, can be highly variable in quality. It's generally not peer reviewed. It comes in a very diverse range of formats and delivery modes. It might not be available electronically. It might only be available in, a brochure that you happen to pick up in an office or a business one time. Grey literature, as I said, can be harder to find. This is because it's not always classified, catalogued, indexed, or archived in the same way that we do with traditional literature. So while we can be pretty satisfied with, only using library search or one of our library databases to find traditional literature, grey literature, you'll need to look outside of this, because unfortunately, it's not going to be found in that one search spot that you look in. And then finally, you also have to be cautious of this information not necessarily being available forever. So once you come across something, try and make your own copy of it. Now, if you're brand new to grey literature and still have no idea where to start, I have put together a few scenarios with some examples for each that we can have a look at together. So you can just get a bit of an idea of where you might start or what's out there, what's available. So first up, we're looking at public health research. So scenario here, maybe you're interested in a recent disease outbreak and you're keen to know about the local impacts. So let's say for this example, we're keen to get a South Australian perspective. So first up, one type of grey literature material you might be interested in looking at is government reports. So this, again, all levels of government. You can start at federal and you can come down to state and local government. So you might have a look at the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, which is that federal level. You might have a look at SA Health, so that's coming down to state level, or you might even have a look at the Australian Bureau of Statistics if you're interested in, some population stats, depending on your local area. You might also have a look at some non-government groups and the documents that they've produced. So for here, for example, maybe Beyond Blue, Royal Flying Doctor Service, or Mental Health Australia. So there's just a few examples here for public health. All of these do have a web presence. So you just go to the website, you have a look. Usually they've got a space where they've got reports or documents that they've produced, and you can have a look on there. Okay, so moving on to our second example in a different field. So this example is looking at political science. So the scenario here is there's some new climate policies that have just come out, and you're interested in looking at the impact on federal and state politics. Okay, so where do we start? Okay, maybe again, we go and have a look at some government documents. So here, for example, you could have a look at the annual climate statement. That's by the Australian government. If you're looking at state politics, you could go have a look at the Government of SA Department for Environment and Water, or you might go and have a look at the Parliament of Australia website as well and see what they've got on there produced. Okay, this next example, because we are looking at politics, you might go straight to the source themselves and have a look at some political party documents. There might be, some speeches or some responses that have been made by these parties in response to these new policies that have come out. As a third option, you could also consider perhaps think tank reports. And think tanks are research groups that look at different problems and try to solve them. They tend to have their own fields of expertise that they focus on. So as an example here, first example, there's the Lowy Institute. This is based in Sydney, and they look at political policies and whatnot. And there's Grattan Institute. This is a public policy institute, research institute. And then the Australia Institute, and they're a public policy institute as well, and they focus on a lot of political, social, environmental issues and whatnot. And all of these, they all produce reports, so you can have a look, you can search, they've got a bit of a database, and you can see what reports they've produced in there. Okay, so that's political science, another scenario, and our third and final scenario that I've got for you today is engineering. So scenario is We're looking at renewable energy storage systems, and we're keen to look at emerging technologies. So I suppose the keyword here is emerging. So we want the latest research. We want the current research. We don't necessarily want to be looking at a book that was produced, took 3 years to produce or something, and then by the time you've got your hands on it, it's already out of date. So first up, maybe you could have a look at some patents. So there's the Australian patent search. You might want to have a look at international patents. So I found if you start with the US patent website, they also have some links to other international patent website searches on there as well. So you could have a look at some patents, or you could maybe have a look at Standards Australia, and you could have a look at the standards for energy storage systems if you need that sort of information. Next up, you could also potentially have a look at some conference papers. So here, there's a couple of conferences that I found that happened this year and one that's happening next year. So whether you can go, that would be ideal. But otherwise, you could have a look on their website, see if they've got conference papers up there. You could have a search for the title of the conference paper. You might be able to find it somewhere. If you can't find it, they generally do have their authors listed and author contact details. So you could always reach out to the author of whoever wrote the conference paper and see if they can send you through some information on that. And then also, just as another example, you could just look at some technical reports. So this is a mix of government and non-governmental organisations. So CSIRO, ARENA, or the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, or Clean Energy Council. So that's just a real sort of basic starting point for some different examples, specific spots that you could go have a look. Now you might be thinking, okay, how am I supposed to know or be able to think of all of these things myself? And it's not at all expected for you to know. As you do more research in your area, you probably become familiar with sources that you go to quite often. But just as to start out, there are plenty of resources to get you started. And I could guarantee that almost every single university library has developed a guide on grey literature, and within those guides, they will have subject-specific resources, links that you can go to and go and have a look at. We do have one ourselves. It does focus a little bit more on health, but you can certainly start there and see where it takes you. So let's have a little quick look at ours. Okay, so this is the University Library webpage. If you're not sure how to get there, but you're on the university homepage, if you click on quick links and pop to library, it will take you here. Otherwise, you can also Google Adelaide Uni Library and it'll take you here. So if you scroll down, what I'm looking for is our How Do I guides. You may or may not be familiar with them. The link for that is just there. So if I click on that, scroll down again. So I'm looking for grey literature. I'm trying to find information. So it's under the Find Information tab. And there's your link there, grey literature for health. So if I click on that one, it takes you into the guide for grey lit. We do recommend, having a play in Google Advanced Search. There's some tips there. You can refine it if you want to, only look in government websites or only find PDFs, that sort of thing. So there's a few key resources on the front page here. You can have a look on the menu here. There's another tab, where else do I find grey literature? So there's a few more links and whatnot there. So that's our guide. But as I said, because ours focuses on the health, if you wanted to branch out, to another university library, you could just Google grey literature university, and it'll probably pop up with a whole bunch of guides that you can have a little browse through. So that's one way if you wanted to sort of get started and you want to have that written guidelines. I would definitely recommend having a look at these guides. You'll find some great information in there and resources. But another avenue that you might want to try is asking Gen AI. And this is actually what I did when I was developing these example scenarios for you, and some specific resources that you might want to have a go at. So yes, when putting together this webinar, I asked Gen AI, what are some example scenarios that I could talk about? And then I went an extra step and I asked it, could it elaborate on a few different scenarios and provide some specific sources of literature, grey literature? And I was actually pleasantly surprised with what I got back, and ended up using quite a bit of it in the content today. Obviously, after looking to make sure that it did exist, it did have reports or whatnot available on the website. So I used Claude Claude is just my go-to model at the moment, but you could absolutely have a go in ChatGPT, Copilot, or whatever model it is that you feel comfortable in. But I thought you might find it useful to know of a prompt that you could have a go at, see what it comes out with, see what it might give you to get you going. So I tried out a few different prompts, but didn't all work out how I wanted, but I landed on this one finally. So you could have a go at this and sub in the information that is relevant to you. So the prompt is this: I'm researching, briefly describe your topic in the field of your field of study. I'm looking for grey literature sources to supplement my academic research. Specifically, I'm interested in finding information about, and then your specific aspect or question within your topic. So your specific aspect could be that local perspective. Maybe I'm looking at an Australian perspective, maybe I'm looking at a South Australian perspective or somewhere else. And then question within your topic could be that real specific circumstance that you're keen to know about. So I tried this out with another example, this time in the education field. So let's have a look and see what Claude gave me for that one. Okay, so this was the prompt where I subbed in some words. So I'm researching innovative teaching practices for improving literacy outcomes in primary schools. So that's my topic that I'm researching. In the field of education, that's the field of study. I'm looking for grey lit sources to supplement my academic research. Specifically, I'm interested in finding information about culturally diverse classrooms in urban Australian settings. So I've got my setting in there, my local perspective, and my specific circumstance that I'm after, which is culturally diverse classrooms. So you can see it's given me, it's spat out some different types of grey literature. It's given me 10 different options, and within each, it's giving me a few different places that I could go and have a look at. It's also given some notes at the bottom. One of the reasons I do like Claude, it does give sort of follow-up. It does say, make sure you check these. Its knowledge cutoff is April this year, so things could have changed. Things, maybe not exist anymore. The name may have changed. And then if you like, you can ask it to elaborate further. You can tweak your prompt a little bit if it's not quite giving you what you were hoping to get out of it. So that's one way that you could, if you're not sure where to start or where could I get this information from that I'm looking for, you could have a go and see what Gen AI gives you. And then just another way that you could have a look at some grey literature, let's say maybe this scenario is you're specifically looking for grey literature. You actually want that type rather than just anything on that topic. So you can go through our library catalogue. We do have some grey literature in there. Okay, so from here, I'll just go quick links, library. So let's stick with the same topic that we're looking at, teaching practices. This is just a very general search. Hit search. Okay, and then to find specifically grey literature, all you would need to do is head to resource type. You can click on show more, and then you'll start selecting things that are grey literature. So dissertations, conference proceedings, reports, theses, standards. So you can select in there. So that's that's another way that you can have a look and see if we've got any grey literature in library search. You will find that if you're doing a keyword search for your topic anyway, you will find both traditional and grey literature in the one space. Okay. Now, when it comes to evaluating your sources, which is something you should be doing anyway, regardless if you're looking at traditional literature or grey literature, even if it's peer reviewed, we always want to be critical of what we're looking at. You may have heard of the CRAP model, that's CRAAP, and this is a checklist that you can use to assess information. There will actually be another webinar on this in a couple of weeks, but for grey literature, which I want to touch on today, we use a different model, and this is because grey literature is a little bit different from traditional because it's so varied. There's so many other things to think about and consider. So this checklist is called ACODS. So AACODS, and it stands for authority, accuracy, coverage, objectivity, date, and significance. And there are a whole bunch of questions that you can ask yourself against each of these. So, for example, when it comes to authority, you want to ask yourself, okay, who is responsible for producing this information for this content? Are they credible? For accuracy, is it supported by documents, other references? Does it seem right? Has it been peer reviewed for some that are peer reviewed? Coverage, are there any limitations to the coverage? Have they stated that there are limitations or not? Objectivity is about bias. It's important to identify bias, even if it's, especially if it hasn't been acknowledged in the work. You always want to be wary of bias. An opinion, even if it's an expert opinion, it's still an opinion, so there can be bias in there. And then date. Does it have a date? If it doesn't have a date, I would urge you to be cautious of using the material. You don't know when it was produced. You don't know if it's relevant to your current situation. So it's a bit of a concern if there is no date on there. So I would investigate a little bit further, or potentially just not consider using it, depending what it is. And then lastly, significance. This is where you judge its value. Is it meaningful? Is it adding further context to your research? Does it have impact? Does it strengthen a position or not? So these are just a few different things you can ask yourself. And if you do want a little bit more expansion on these points, if you head back to our How Do I guide that we just looked at before, under How Do I Evaluate Grey Literature, there is a link to a PDF document. And within each of these points, it gives you little prompting questions that you can ask yourself. So just have a little look at it. If you're not sure, you may be on the fence about whether or not you should be using a resource, just have a look at this checklist and see if there's any, red flags on there, or if it's looking good and looking like you could use it. Okay. So that's all the content we have for this webinar this week. So we went over a bit of an introduction to what grey literature is, who produces it, some different examples, different scenarios and different types that you might be able to use, and then some strategies for how you might go about finding it. So, you can start out with using library guides, you can start out with using ours, you can have a look at what other universities have produced, you can try AI, see what they pop out with, or you can jump into library search and see what's in there as well. And then, as we've just gone over a little bit about evaluating grey literature as well. Yeah, we have a webinar every week. So next week we're looking at academic databases, and then following weeks, as you can see on screen. So we invite you to register and come along. We'd love to have you there. Thank you for joining me today, and we hope to see you next week or in the future. Thanks.